Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be doing a fairly quick video based off of a blog post which I originally published on the 11th of January 2021 about why historical fiction does not require real characters. This is a trend I've really kind of annoyed by. I mean, of course, there's nothing wrong with using real characters in historical fiction or alternative history. I've already, published one alternative history and I'm working on another one, although it's kind of a bit hiatus at the moment. But obviously, just think about why you want to use real characters in your book instead of using all original characters, or if you're going to use a real historical figure, maybe just in a more secondary role. For example, that person is summoned to the White House or something, or a meeting with the military brass and gets to meet a real life person, or maybe they're hovering in the background a little bit a few times, but just to make that person the main character, it just seems like, a badly done trend when just doing it for mindlessly its own sake. So anyway, it seems like many younger historical fiction writers and newer writers in general are under the presumption they need to write about real people. Well, there is a long, rich tradition of historicals about or prominently featuring real people, as I just mentioned, as well as the entire subgenre of alternative history. There has never been a requirement to draw your characters from real life. Ask yourself why you want to write about this person and why it needs to be fiction. If you're so passionately interested in her or him, why not write a biography or a nonfiction book about a certain aspect or period of his or her life? As it is, many of these novels read like biographies already, just maybe add in a couple of made up characters or invent some dialogue about a situation that may or may not have happened. One of my major problems with these books is that the authors often go off in a completely ahistorical direction, although obviously that's not unique to historical fiction about real characters. I see too much of that in regular historical fiction about entirely fictional characters as well. For example, this is one of the really big ones. So many people have a pet peeve. I'm not the only one. People who lived 100 plus years ago are given very modern values. Seriously, I understand, you want to make the character a little bit more relatable or real to a modern audience. So you're going to have a woman who's, has a mind of her own and wants to do more with her life than just marry at all of 18, 20 years old and become a full-time stay-at-home mom and housewife. Obviously, of course, not that there's anything wrong with that, but just you just want modern characters to modern readers to relate to a woman who oh, I would like to go to university and maybe work and live on my own for a little while, or at least spend some time studying until I decide to get married to a man of my own choosing when I may be 22, 25 years old, and maybe I don't want to have 10 children. I only want 4 or 5 of them, or just I want to travel a little bit. But obviously, of course, you have to put those characters who are against the grain within the parameters of their era. Even the most radical people of any given era, they still operated within certain boundaries. There were lines they didn't cross, things they didn't realize they could do, or things they would have been horrified by. So just don't make your character exactly like a 21st century person. It really shows there's a difference between a historical character with current year values and a actual real historical character with values that would have been common among very radical or against the grain liberal people of that era, but anyway, rant over. And another example of characters going off in a completely ahistorical direction are when 100% fictional characters are given major roles in the main character's life. Yes, you can do this a fair bit in alternative history, depending on what you change and when. For example, if you change the very important event when the character is 12, 13 years old or whatever, and they go off in an entirely different trajectory, that's the word I was blanking on, they did in real life. Yeah, of course they would have gotten a chance to live a much different life and meet much different people, or maybe they married a very different person, and so that took them off on a different pathway or such that. But obviously, when you're dealing with historical fiction based on real events, you're not changing anything. Yeah, you can't really just go around inventing fictional characters playing important roles in that person's life. So seriously, again, consider why you want to write about a real character so much instead of just creating your own 100% out of whole cloth. And another pet peeve about characters going off in a completely ahistorical direction: storylines and events are invented without even the thinnest shred of proof. And again, yeah, you can do this in alternative history. Maybe that's a genre you really want to look more into. If yeah, it's really, really something you're passionate about doing, making up all these fun new characters because you don't want to just be limited to like historical characters who actually lived, I realize like you have much more leeway to like go off in different directions, but like again, like don't do it like as alleged straight historical fiction if you're just like pretty much inventing everyone and everything except for the person who is like the main character. So just, like consider why you were actually writing about this person. I sound like a broken record. Mary, Mrs. A. Lincoln immediately comes to mind as such a story. I did like this book in general. I gave it 3 stars, and I do have a blog post about it, which I do plan to turn into a video at some point in future. But there is just so much detailed documentation on the Lincolns, and none of it supports the fantastical depictions of Robert, the oldest son, as a cold-hearted villain from birth, Mary having an affair, Mary being sex crazed, so much so she's even thinking about sex at her husband's deathbed. Like, seriously, what the hell? Or Mary seducing her husband to force him to marry her. I mean, like I said, in general, like the book wasn't that bad. I did give it 3 stars, and I read every single word of the 700 odd pages, but there was just like, so many things in the book. She was taking all these historical liberties and making stuff up, like, just like make a character with a similar life to Mary and just like go with that instead of just like going off in the weird direction that she did. Julie Oranger, the author of the dreadful snooze fest, The Invisible Bridge, which I also have a blog post about and do still plan to turn into a video at some point in future, published in 2021, I believe, her long-promised novel about journalist Varian Fry, one of only 5 Americans to date, as far as I know. That stat is still correct. There's still only 5 Americans to be honored by Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations, people who put their lives in danger to rescue Jews from the Nazis and bring them to like America or safe havens around the world, or keep them in hiding in their own country and stuff. And they did this without expecting or receiving any like monetary reward or demanding people convert or like any political promotions or anything like that. They just did it out of the goodness of their heart without any regard for like their safety. And some of these people sadly did lose their lives in sheltering Jews from the Nazis. Given the subject matter, you would expect a gripping epic about a hero helping many artists, writers, musicians, and other intellectuals to escape Vichy France, right? Wrong. It's all about his insipid gay romance with a made-up character. If you're going to make a real historical figure gay, you'd better be prepared to prove it with irrefutable evidence instead of speculation, and to check more boxes. Ms. Oranger also made this fake lover biracial, and obviously, of course, I have absolutely nothing against like historical characters being gay or like interracial romances or anything like that. I mean, it did happen in the past, although obviously people had to be way more discreet about it, and sometimes, unfortunately, they would even like get thrown in the loony bin or sent to prison or murdered if the truth came out. But it just seems like so many writers these days are just like including elements like that to, oh, I'm just mindlessly checking another diversity box. It doesn't even matter if this doesn't work well with the story, the way it's, structured, or the actual like historical context. No, I'm just, oh, look at me, I'm checking a box. Gay characters, lots of, a rainbow tribe of friends, like, every single person in this group of friends or neighborhood is like a different like race or ethnicity or like religious group or like political background or things like that, instead of just like, oh, what would actually like feel good with this like historical era. Like maybe that person, like the city you're writing about or that particular neighborhood, it was primarily like Irish or like Norwegian or German American or something like that. So it would make no sense to have all these like Latino and like Filipino and like Jewish and like Chinese, all sorts of different characters like intermingling with these people. Or just like, of course, like why would you have so many openly gay characters in a historical fiction book, unless of course that's the whole point of the historical novel. It's set in like San Francisco or Paris or something, which was like a relative haven for gays and lesbians pre Stonewall. But it just seems like so many people, they're just, oh, I've got to check another diversity box merely for its own sake. And that feels insulting and tokenistic, like you're not doing it because you really wanted to or it genuinely fit with the actual story, but just because you're like, oh yeah, I want some like cred, and like just, well, that's a whole rant for a whole other topic. So I'm just like Ms. Oranger's massively overrated first novel. Oh, that novel has such a horrible taste in my mouth. This one, too, is wildly overwritten, with overlong, pointless descriptions of everything. Like, oh, that was so annoying. Ms. Oranger also continues her pretentious habit of regularly having entire lines in untranslated French, German, Italian, and Latin. as well as liberally using million-dollar thesaurus words. Like, I wish I had, kept a list for her invisible bridge, because, like, I lost count of how many times she was just using all these million-dollar thesaurus words no one normal is going to be using in real life, or maybe just no one outside of a very particular niche audience, like, for example, like artists or architects or just like people interested in Parisian history. It was just so obnoxious. And like, oh, we're going to take a walk through Paris, or like take a drive, and I'm going to mention every single street we're passing because I'm just like showing off my research, like, that kind of thing. It was just so obnoxious, and she just spent so much time like over explaining, or not over explaining necessarily, just like, over describing everything. There's no real story emerging. I really got the impression she was like an MFA, like showing off like how awesome she was. Like, oh, look, I can use all these fancy words, and I have all these like, ornate flowery descriptions of everything. And meanwhile, I'm forgetting to actually tell an actual story where, things happen and there's an actual like plot and character development. Other times, a book is little more than a direct retelling of a memoir or autobiographical novel, only with another person in the main role. Nothing new is brought to the story. Caroline, Little House Revisited, oh, I hated that book. I think I gave it 2 stars, is a prime example of this. The author also plays into the inaccurate stereotype of Victorian women as dour, depressing, and prudish, and that is like, a complete falsehood. If you're like interested, maybe I could do a future like blog post and video on that, like debunking that concept. Just like so many like people believe these like myths and stereotypes about Victorian women, and of course there's like the continuing myth about like, oh, corsets were deforming women right and left, and their organs were being squashed and breaking ribs, when in actual fact, like, most women were not tight lacing at all, or sleeping in their corsets, or starting to wear corsets from like 5-10 years old. It was like a very important foundational garment that provided like very important support for them. Like, what were these women supposed to do if they didn't wear corsets? Just like, seriously, I hate these like historical myths, like claiming corsets were this torture device and that no women wore one by choice, when the actual historical facts proves that was not true at all. But anyway, that's for a different subject. We also have a trend of books like Michel Moran's Nefertiti, with a first-person narrator who is not the main character. This isn't necessarily a badly done gimmick. Like, for example, that works really great in the Sherlock Holmes stories, but there needs to be a compelling reason why the story isn't being told by the main character, and the narrator always needs to be in the same place as the main character, or know all these details about the main character. Do young writers these days truly not understand the concept of third person? It's like really sad when I hear younger and newer writers, it's like saying with complete seriousness, oh, gross, like third person past tense, that's so ugly and musty and boring and old-fashioned and fuddy-duddy. Oh, gotta write first person, and particularly first person present tense, because anything else just isn't, like hip and relevant, and no one wants to read that anyway. Like, oh, I just hate that attitude. I have zero problems with sex scenes involving fictional characters, but sex scenes with real people cross a major line for me. Unless this is a person like Casanova, who made no secret of his sexual exploits, it seems a huge invasion of privacy. Do you really think they'd want total strangers 100 plus years later to speculate about their most private, intimate moments for the entire world to read? And I do have like technically a sex scene in my alternative history and Alexei Lived, and there's also a sex scene in my hiatus alternative history about Dante and Beatrice, but I only put them in there because they're like wedding night scenes, an actual part of the plot, and I did not make them graphic or explicit at all. They're like just very like sweet, like to the point, just more like the focus is all about, like the emotions and just the feelings of being with that person for the first time. It's not, like graphic description of, like parts and tingly feelings and like just, obviously I'm not going to get too graphic, but, I just kept them as like, sweet and nondescript as possible, and only put those sex scenes in those respective books because they were like, wedding night scenes. And like, you can't just like have a fade to black. Sometimes you just need to like have that for the emotional, like the development of the characters. I'm sorry, I'm blanking. I'm when I go off script, this is completely unscripted. Even worse are scenes of people relieving themselves. Gross. Why did this ever become a thing in fiction? It's like, whenever I read a book with either a real character or like a fictional character, like going to the bathroom, it's just, why would you include that? I mean, okay, maybe if this person is, like getting sick, they're like, have a horrible stomach ache from food poisoning, or if it's a woman discovering she's pregnant because she keeps getting morning sickness, yeah, that's okay. Like vomiting is maybe a little bit different, but again, like you shouldn't really be too graphic about that either. But just like, why would you do that? It's like, it's nothing sacred anymore. But I do realize many people in this current generation, they routinely have like long personal like phone conversations in public when everyone can hear all about their sex lives and their like doctors test results and just like their relationship problems. Like seriously, just like some things need to be private for a reason. I get the distinct feeling many of these writers are not motivated by respect and have made little to no effort to understand these people in their full historical context. They just grabbed a familiar name and decided to spice his or her life up for modern readers. Here's a novel idea. If you like this historical figure so much, but can't bear to stick to just the facts, create your own character with similar circumstances. Then you can do whatever you want with her or him, instead of being bound to following documented history. And it really feels like a lot of people following this trend in recent years would be so much better off if they had just like gone the entirely fictional route and like kept a few life circumstances or general, like where they lived, for example, or the time in history, like similar. So thank you very much for watching. I really enjoy seeing comments from you guys, and I will hope to be posting another video sometime later this week. I am still planning to do a couple of NaNoWriMo videos coming up this week, so thanks again for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye.